Hello, Sexy Beast, and welcome back to War Thunder. In the background, you're going to be seeing some footage of the AH-1Z in top tier, where we actually faced off against a SAM radar SPAA and somehow managed to actually get some kills with this magic little trick called using cover. Sorry for the lack of content in the last week. I went to a medieval fair with my mom, saw some girl bouncing her tits. It was overall a great time. So today I want to touch on a topic that has popped up about last week after a video by the Orange Doom. You've probably seen the hashtag fix the game in 1.91 being spammed out quite a bit everywhere. And I want to add my own discussion to that discussion, so to speak. In this video, Orange mentioned Gaijin paying YouTubers to make videos on their game, which, yes, is true. It's exactly the same thing that Wargaming does by sponsoring videos from big million subscriber YouTube channels out there, from people who don't regularly play the game. And any and all such transaction has to be clearly clarified by law. If you say that you probably wouldn't disclose that you got paid to make a video on a certain game, you are actively breaking the law. And he also touched on the ADATs being overpowered, which, yes, I agree on, but I want to add a lot more points to the discussion here. First and foremost, I want to say something that's probably rather unpopular here. The community spamming out a hashtag is not going to do anything at all. I've seen lots of angry people posting on Reddit that, oh no, we got chat banned and we got our message deleted on the official Gaijin stream for spamming the same hashtag over and over again without actually adding anything to the conversation. And yeah, I'm sorry to tell you, but that is how it works. The people who run the streams don't have any say in the game whatsoever. It's not Sean, it's not Bruce, it's not the guys in the background handling our CC requests or handling the social media. These are not the guys that run the game, these are essentially just the messengers, and they're not going to be forwarding to Gaijin that, oh hey, in the stream we got spammed with this hashtag that we don't know where it's coming from, and no one actually added anything to it. What I want to do with this video is change this community outcry into something a little bit more constructive and use a couple of examples of the past, as well as talking about a couple of topics that hopefully everyone can agree on. Gaijin does change things about the game when they are requested. The problem is, oftentimes the requests from the community are very conflicting, and oftentimes the community itself doesn't really know what it wants. There's a eternal struggle between air and ground players, for example, in GFRB, where the air players always want the planes to get more power. They want the old CAS meta back, with the rockets being absolute nukes on sticks that you can fire multiple out of. Meanwhile, the tankers want a game mode just for themselves, without any aircrafts involved at all. And so you have these two factions in the game that both have their own voices but completely contradict each other. And it applies to other issues as well. People don't seem to have a unified view, generally speaking, of what they actually want to see in the game. And of course, that isn't really going to be helping in any way. There have been examples in the past where the community was unified on issues and where those issues were amended. The biggest example here being the fiasco about the free parts in FPE, and as well when Gaijin tried to introduce the modification upgrades system. People were heavily against both of those things, and as such they were addressed. In the case of parts in FPE, not to the extent that I was hoping for, but we'll touch on that a bit later. So as a community, let's see if we can actually get our word across in a more or less uniform way, and instead of simply blindly raging about issues with the game and spamming out users' hashtags, see if you can actually forward some sensible fixes. The journal format is quite simple and it's something that I've been using for years. Back when the Rocket CAS meta was king, I made a video about it, and I explained what the problem was, I showcased it, and I suggested fixes to them. Pretty much exactly the same thing happened when the pilot damage mechanic was finally removed from the game. And such we're going to be following this model to touch on the following topics here. So, keep in mind, these are just a couple of topics that I have issue with in the game. Of course, I want you to add your own, but I do want you to reasonably do it, explain how it is wrong, why you think it is wrong, and what you suggest to fix it. The first example here would be touching on Naval and specifically the Naval rewards. Probably you are not aware of this at all because barely anyone plays Naval, and this is one of the reasons why nobody plays Naval, among a few issues, but we're not going to touch on all of them, or else this video is going to be over an hour long, is the Naval rewards. This has been an issue with the game since the Ground Forces beta first came out, and to be fair to Gaijin, they did fix that eventually, and Ground Forces research is much quicker than it used to be, but it suffered from the same syndrome where it seems like Gaijin is artificially inhibiting the amount of research you can do in any given time. And this is exactly the same thing that happened with tanks back in the day. When tanks launched, we only had two nations, Russia and Germany. Of course, the tech reasons were nowhere near as fleshed out, and as such the RP gain was very slow compared to air, simply because there weren't as many vehicles to actually research. The problem is Gaijin likes to overdo it a little bit and keep it in the game for way too long. Even after years of ground forces have been fully launched, they still had the artificial inhibition of the RP gain in tanks. Except we actually had a lot more tanks to research, and as such ground research was really quite bad and really quite grindy. Gaijin finally amended that somewhat. They haven't quite brought up the ground research speed to the same levels as air just yet, and frankly I don't think they ever will, but at least they have removed the artificial RP cap that you used to get if you stayed longer in the game. Essentially your RP gain would plateau, and it wouldn't make any sense to actually stay in the game until the end. You would actually research much faster by simply getting a cap, getting a couple kills and bailing out and going back to hangar. Now the same thing is kind of happening with Naval here. You've got these trees on almost every nation now, of course still not completely fleshed out, but you have a decent amount of vehicles to research, and some of them taking quite a while, quite a hefty RP load as well. Given that we now have light cruisers, and probably heavier ships are coming somewhere in the future as well. Yet the naval RP gain is absolutely abysmal. I've seen a Reddit post the other day of a guy who got 7 kills and multiple caps in a match of naval RB, and he only got 2,000 research points for it. This is clearly nowhere near even ground forces, which by itself is inferior to the Air Force's grind, and it really just results in less people actually wanting to play Naval. The Naval Forces aspect of the game has always been a bit of a black sheep for the past 3 years that it's been in development, and making the research so extremely grindy is definitely not going to be helping that in any way. It's going to be spooking away even more players. Something that Naval can't really afford right now if it ever actually wants to be a functioning game mode. As such, the first suggestion I have here is really quite simple. Increase the RP gain for Naval, make it not utterly ridiculous. The next issue I have with the game is one that affects gameplay in Ground Forces RB. Well, Ground Forces in general, really. Have you ever had this situation where you had a solid shell, like for example APCR, APDS, APFSDS, and you hit an enemy tank only to hit the ammo, but not actually do any damage? The ammo, instead of exploding, just vanishes, but at the same time it absorbs the fragments of whatever shell you were firing, and as such actually acts as extra armor essentially, keeping the crew of the enemy tank safe enough that they can fire back at you and kill you. This is certainly a situation that many people have experienced, and it's something that is extremely frustrating. When you hit an ammo rack, you should be rewarded for it, not punished. And in terms of gameplay design, it's just absolutely moronic, really. It's like, imagine if you're playing CSGO and you hit a guy in the head with an AWP and it does no damage. This, sadly, still happens in Ground Forces. Just because you hit an ammo rack and destroy it, it doesn't actually guarantee that the ammo rack explodes and destroys a tank. You can still run into situations where the ammo rack simply disappears but doesn't actually do any damage to the rest of the tank. I have a huge issue with that, and in terms of gameplay balance, really, which is what I mentioned just a couple seconds ago. Hitting an ammo rack and destroying it should be rewarded. If Gaijin is too afraid of perhaps secondary fragments setting off ammo racks too easily, just increase the hit points of ammo racks, because that is the way that they are coded into the game. But make a direct hit that blackens the ammo rack and result in an explosion 100% of the time. This would result in a lot less rage of people running into these issues, It might even result in less complaints about ghost shells that it actually hits and penetrate, but got absorbed by the ammo rack without doing any damage. And it might even make top tier tanks a little bit less frustrating. Speaking of top tier tanks, the next bit is something that has been discussed quite heavily. In fact, some people have been suggesting that the matchmaker spread should be reduced to 0.7, which I don't quite agree on, more on this a bit later. We are of course talking about the battle rating compression at higher tiers. For air, I would suggest that anything beyond 6.0 is having some compression issues. For example, the biggest example here being the Mitsubishi T2, which is so far ahead of everything else. Gaijin had to pretty much limit it to fighting itself, and for some reason, even after 2 patches, it still doesn't have a proper competitor and is still at 10.0 despite being so much faster and so much better in competent hands than any of its competition. But tanks suffer from this issue too. There are about anything after 7.0, perhaps even earlier if you count 5.7 tanks against 6.7 tanks, where compression becomes a big issue. One of the examples I can really give here is the AUBL-74, which is the Simulian cannon, which is about to be released to the game. This is a vehicle that sits at 8.0 and pretty much does nothing better than the Centauro, which sits at the same battle rating. It doesn't have armor, so much so that it doesn't have even protection against machine gun fire. The mobility is alright, although for a wheeled vehicle it's going to struggle backwards, having only 19 km/h reverse speed and not doing so well off-road. And the cannon has a really long reload for what is just a 60mm cannon. It reloads at best at 6.7 seconds. As such, many people have been suggesting that it should get down-tiered. The problem is, you can't really do that, because even a 0.3% down tier, a 0.3 battle rating down tier of that tank, so putting it to 7.7, would suddenly change it hugely. All of a sudden, coming from something that is really not quite strong enough for 8.0 when you compare it to the Centaur that is available in the same tech tree for free, at 7.7 it could be facing 6.7 tanks in a full down tier. Now imagine what that little thing could do against 6.7 heavy tanks with the APF SDS that has a long rod modifier. It could just punch cleanly through any heavy tank, T-34s, T-29s, T-30s, King Tigers. They would be pretty much completely nullified by this little vehicle, which is much faster, much smaller, has a similar reload still, but can just lull pen it from any angle at any speed because of the amazing stabilizer it gets. You can kind of see the issue here. If a 0.3 battle rating change can take something that is, frankly, a bit underpowered perhaps, and turn it completely overpowered, another example of course being the Shermans, the Jumbo Shermans, which depending on the 0.3 battle rating change can be either absolutely shit or absolutely amazing, you kind of realize that the game perhaps has some compression issues. The problem is, Gaijin is just, for whatever reason, extremely reluctant with changing battle rating ranges, max ranges, or just the frequency of battle rating changes in general. Again, I don't know why the T2, since it was introduced, it's still at 10.0. It is not at 10.0 jet, but Gaijin simply refuses to up-tier that vehicle. The same thing with the top-tier tanks. The Leopard 2A5 is not equal to a Leopard 2A4, yet it sits at the same battle rating, and can face tanks that are much inferior to it in every single aspect. This is compression at its finest, and it's very prevalent in the higher tiers. As I mentioned before, some people have suggested fixing this by reducing the matchmaking spread from 1.0 to 0.7, but that would just be a sweeping change that would also affect the lower tiers, and I personally don't think the lower tiers really need that. Instead, Gaijin just needs to be less reluctant with upping the max battle rating of any given game mode and any given vehicle type. They always give the same excuse of matchmaking times being the issue. They don't want to increase the battle rating range too much, or matchmaker is going to take way too long. I can kind of understand, but at the same time I really disagree. For one, people are always going to be playing top tier regardless. They are the strongest vehicle. In a top tier tank you are guaranteed to not have up tiers. So people are always going to be playing that no matter what you do, what battle rating you put them at. So they shouldn't have any problems with queue times, really. And for the low-end vehicles, yes, there might be a slight increase to queue times, but at the same time, there are also going to be more people in the queue, simply because they feel like the matches are actually a bit fairer. Too many times do I read in my comments that people quit the game, getting into the higher tiers, because it was simply too unfair to them. They were constantly getting dunked on by high tier vehicles that were way too strong compared to themselves. The balance is really a bit off with those compressions of battle ratings, and if you decompress the battle ratings properly and more frequently as well, don't wait 3 months between battle rating changes. Gaijin, please! I know you need your data, but come on! Just make small incremental changes and see how it goes. You don't need to go full on double nerf or double buff. You don't need to nerf a vehicle at the same time that you up the battle rating. Do one thing at a time, do it more frequently. Hopefully, you'll see that everything turns out fine. In fact, that's another big issue I have. It seems like Gaijin often waits months and months and months to fix something, and then hits it with the double nerf. A prime example here, for example, being the R2-Y2s, which recently had a double nerf. The R2-Y2s were overperforming quite a bit because of the air spawn, and as such they could really easily just wipe out enemy teams in the first couple of minutes of the game. And that has been an issue for years, really, without any changes to the planes whatsoever. All of a sudden, not only did they get the air spawn completely removed, having to start from the runway, they also got the battle rating increased, and I'm pretty sure the silver line cost increased as well, which is just another stupidity. Well, surprise surprise, you barely see any R2-Y2s in the game now. The R2-Y2's only real strength was the absurd bomber air spawn, because it's not a plane that can really deal with losing energy. Once you do that first pass from high altitude, once you're cut at low altitude with slow speed, you are not recovering. And this is just one example of many that I don't want to get too deep into. You can definitely think of some off the top of your head in the comment section down below. It has been a prevalent issue. Gaijin takes way too long to make fixes, to make changes that are uniformly being asked about by the community, and when they do the changes they completely overdo it. So in addition to making changes a bit more frequent, also make them smaller. This is what I'm suggesting. Don't do a double nerf, do one thing or the other. Either you up the battle rating, or you change the performance of the vehicle, or you affect the spawn altitude, for example, for the planes. Don't do everything at once, or you are going to be completely shafting that specific vehicle. Speaking of balancing, I also want to touch on the issue of repair costs, which have been getting just more and more ridiculous. Gaijin does their repair cost changes apparently by some kind of algorithm that looks at the stats of a vehicle, how it is played, how it does, how much SL it seems to be earning in any given match, and then transforms that into changes into the repair costs. Massive examples of that would, for example, be the Lorraine 4TT, which is a very, very, very good vehicle, but has been absolutely shafted by a massive silver line costs. The E100 is another vehicle example, which is essentially just a mouse that can turn slightly faster, but for whatever reason has a 32,000 silver line repair costs. The heavy bombers like the Tu-4 and the B-29 are another prime examples, both having absurdly high repair costs. And I am not 100% sure where these are coming from, but I have some theories. Especially the community has some theories. It seems that, again, the algorithm is looking at the performance of the players, and this creates a bit of a feedback loop, really. The higher the repair costs of a given vehicle, the less people can actually afford to play it. It's actually only really left with people that are dedicated enough to play it, that have the skills to play it, and as such skew the results even further. They up the average performance of the vehicle, because the less skilled people simply can't afford to actually run the vehicles. And this creates a loop of silver line cost gets increased, less people play it. The only people remaining that can play it are the ones who can play it very effectively. As such, the stats get skewed, get upped, and the algorithm looks at it, despite us having increased the silver line repair costs, the vehicle is actually performing even better, so let's increase it again, and again, and again, and again, until we get these absolutely absurd repair costs. Instead of doing that, why not simply up the battle rating by 0.3? Why do we have to get to the point where vehicles can cost more to run that can actually make back in RB mode? Because this is my other theory, especially with the heavy bombers, it seems like they are quite effective in simulator mode, and the algorithm takes the stats of what people gain in simulator and applies the repair costs change to RB as well, which just doesn't work. Anyways, vehicles should not be balanced by silver line cost in any circumstance. It just essentially tells you, oh hey, this vehicle is really good for this battle rating. But you know what? Screw you, we won't allow you to play it. You can just look at it in your hangar, you can't actually afford to actually play it. What kind of gameplay sense does it make to block your players from playing their vehicle because they can't afford to play it? Why? And such a solution I put forward here is just to simply rely less on silver line cost upping balancing and be a bit less stingy about simply upping the battle rating by a little bit. Again, no double nerfs. Don't upgrade the battle rating and reduce the performance of the vehicle at the same time. Just do one thing at a time. Do it a bit more frequently, do one thing at a time. Don't take 3 months to do something. This is something that I actually forgot to talk about a bit earlier, so let's consider this as an addendum to the Silverline repair cost talk we had a bit earlier. When you finish a game, the repair cost doesn't get calculated into the total SL gain you made for that. So when you go to the results screen, those silver lines you see, those are the total you have gained, but those don't take into account the ones you lost through ammo, replenishment, or repair costs from vehicles. And as such, it's very misleading. It doesn't actually represent the true Silverline net's gain or loss that you have actually made in that match. The only way to actually look that up is to manually, after the match, go into the battle messages section and clicking on the battle you just had. Then it does actually show you the total net gain or loss that you've had, taking into account what you've earned and what you spent. But this is really something that should be right in the results screen. Not just by having to manually go through the battle messages that some people might not even know about. Again, just a quick and easy quality of life fix. Make the final results screen take ammo costs and repair costs into account when displaying the total amount of silver lines you've earned and lost. This one is one that probably bugs me the most, and that I was really disappointed when they first announced it with the XM1 premium tank. Gaijin has broken their own oath that they've had for years, that they would never sell a top tier vehicle. Yet, in the game, right now, we have multiple vehicles that you can buy that immediately grant you access to top tier matches. Once again, issue of a bit of battle rating compression. I want a bit of a roll call here in the comments. How many of you top tier players who grinded their way through it have had their matches ruined by new players who have absolutely no idea what they are doing, but simply bought a top tier vehicle and got put into a top tier match? I can guess that quite a few of you have had this problem. Now, I'm not blaming the players who actually bought the vehicles here. It's not their fault that they are available. There are people out there who simply want to play the game and don't care too much about the grind, and perhaps they simply want to play the Abrams, and that is perfectly fine. The problem is it is Gaijin's fault that they've put these vehicles in a situation where they can face top tier vehicles. And they have enabled people who don't have enough experience to actually do well in those battles to gain access to them. How many times do we see top tier battles in a certain nation where half your team is these premium vehicles and they all just bail after the first death because they don't have any backups and throw the game for your team in results? It is an extremely frustrating experience, both for the players who got there through the grind and through the experience, and probably for the new players, because they are simply buying something that is inferior to the vehicles they are facing. Now, it is of course too late to remove the vehicles that have already been introduced. We can't remove the XM1 from the game, we can't remove the 9.0 jets, premium jets from the game. It is too far gone to actually do that. But we can hopefully ask Gaijin to not do that in the future. Hopefully in the future, when Gaijin does finally go around to increase the battle rating cap further for aircraft and tanks, resulting in a bit of decompression, they will keep this in mind and they won't sell more premiums that have immediate access to the new top battle rating matches. Gaijin, remember what you said in the past. Remember how you said you would never sell top tier vehicles. I know there's a lot of money to be made. I know that Gaijin is a business and has to make money, but There are ways to make money without sacrificing the quality of the game. And this is something that Gaijin really has to be reminded of every so often. Now here is where you guys come in, the viewer. I don't want you to spam a hashtag on forums, Reddit, streams, whatever, without adding anything to it. Fix the game in 1.91 is not going to be doing anything. Gaijin isn't going to be fixing the game in 1.91, no matter how much you scream about it. Instead, let's go for the long-term goal here. Let's create a unified community voice that expresses properly what they want. As such, I suggest this new hashtag. Please consider. Go to the forums, go to the comments of this video, go to Reddit, go wherever you have to go. Perhaps not the streams, because that is really not the place for them. But any official or unofficial, any kind of community channel that is out there, follow this model that I've just presented of identifying the problem, explain why it is a problem, and suggesting a reasonable fix to the problem, and attach the hashtag please consider to it. Whilst Gaijin definitely has a reputation of not listening too much to community demands, if we do show that we are all one voice on certain issues, I am absolutely sure that Gaijin will actually eventually come around. It might take them a few years, but they are changing the game. And they have been changing the game for the better. There have been lots of small quality of life updates, quality of game updates, changes, balancing changes that have been introduced into the game, and I'm very grateful for that. I just hope it doesn't stop here and that it keeps on going. And we as a community really have the duty to express how we want the game to be steered in the future. And so I ask of you, do this right now in the comments. I want to hear from you what issues you have with the game. In a polite way, please. Show me something that you personally find is wrong with the game and that could use changing. Show me why you think it is a big issue. And suggest some solutions that make sense both to the player and to Gaijin as a company. Hopefully we can actually create some healthy discussion for once, although that might just be wishful thinking now in this community at times. And so I also ask everyone to respond to these suggestions, but do it in a civilized manner. Don't just go, no, your idea is stupid, fuck you. Don't do that. Let's make constructive criticism of the game, and also constructive criticism of the constructive criticism. Again guys, come on, it's not rocket science. We are all a community. We are split on many issues, but if we can actually get together and actually have a somewhat uniform voice, somewhat consensus on certain topics, we can make the change. It'll show Gaijin that we are not just some bunch of kids who scream around hashtags and don't know what we actually want. This video has become way too long. My recording is now over 45 minutes, so I definitely have to cut this down quite a lot. Hopefully I managed to make it less than 28 minutes this time. So we're going to cut this short. Hopefully you have enjoyed this video. Hopefully I've been able to change some minds here, stop spouting useless hashtags, actually contribute to the discussion in a meaningful way. And let's see if Gaijin actually responds to this. I mean, if we as a community together suggest something in a polite way, in a constructive way, and Gaijin doesn't consider it, then yes, go to the streets, go riot, go do a free Python FP fiasco 2.0, that's fine by me. But let's at least try, okay? As always lads, if you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like, spread it around with your friends if you agree with the points in this video. If you're new here, subscribe, we're going to be doing more War Thunder content in the near future, and as always, my name is Marcus Boom, and I'll see you in the next one.
You can lift your head up to the sky, take a deeper breath and give it time. You can walk the path among the lines, with your shattered frame of mind. Or instead you could always stay, we can wait right here and play, until somehow you can find